thank you so much. Thank you, Howard. It's a pleasure being here this evening with you, and I have to say that I'd like to thank Lexar, B&H for hosting this, and SVA. It's really important. My association with these companies, the single most important thing, I think there are two actually, is the fact that they support education like this, sharing my ability as a photographer and an artist to exchange what I do with you guys, and also they innovate, and that's the key word. And I am interested in showing you today where I came from as a photographer, and how I started and how my work has truly evolved. So if you just are patient, we're going to go through a little journey, and I'm going to take you through where I started and what my beginning was, really. My first pictures actually were through a microscope, and that was a revelatory experience for me because I was 12 years old, and I was very interested in science, and took a class on photomicrography, and that's when the bug bit me, this idea of taking pictures. And it forever changed my life because I became completely obsessed with the act of discovery. And you're going to see how that has become a major theme in everything that I do. One of the things that's always interesting is we look at as an artist and a photographer, you don't realize how your work is still very much the same as it was when you first started. And this is a photograph I did when I was 14 years old. And I was actually, it's a black and white image, obviously, but it's solarized, and I experimented. Even in the early days, I was doing things that were sort of somewhat, experimental. But one of the things that I love about this image is it's the first time I ever did single point perspective. And I think as we move forward through my work, you're going to see that this is a theme in all my pictures. So as I started to explore color, that happened probably by the time I was more like 14. I started shooting color slide film. And this was a photograph that I did of sprinklers. And one of the themes of my work is texture. And I think that's the first time I began to realize that there was a surface that I could explore on film. Journalism played an important part of my development as a photographer. I studied at the Newhouse School of Communications. I was very fortunate to have a mentor there who encouraged me to essentially start to really focus on color because he saw something in my work. And as a result, I kept photographing in color. I actually was hired by United Press International to cover the Watkins Glen Grand Prix, and it was they gave me 3 rolls of film. I actually caught the accident on film, and then the rest of the day I shot color film. And this was during what they call the bog, which is an area where they actually invite you in to park your car. Unknowingly, you get stuck, and the next thing you know, your car's on fire. So it was this crazy, crazy place. Street photography became a big theme early on in my work also. And you're going to see how, as my work has evolved, how important an element that is in all my latest body of work, day to night. This was a breakthrough image for me. There is a moment as a photographer where you begin to wonder, well, what is my style? Like, what's style? And I discovered after I made this picture that style for me was, do you feel yourself in a photograph? And this is the first time that happened. I began to feel myself in my work. And it was a breakthrough. And every time after this photograph, I wanted to feel that in my photographs. In 1978, I was a junior in college, and I'd heard about a university trip, a historic university trip to China. And so I sort of wrangled my way in, and I went up to the head of he was the dean of the Visual and Performing Arts School, and asked him straight out, you need to document this, and I'm the guy to do it. And he was open to it, and so they covered my expenses, and I ended up going to China. And my whole intent was to create a body of work as a college student that I could really embrace and say, this is who I am as a photographer. So, this was done in '78, and I still feel the pictures have a certain power. I'm always envious of young photographers, and I'm sure there are many in this audience, of where you are, because as a photographer and an artist, I think you don't realize how unique a moment in your life you're at when you're really in college doing the things you're doing, even though you think, oh gosh, and not another test. But the reality is the real world pressure hasn't really touched you yet. And so that's a beautiful place to be artistically. You're going to see my China work 27 years later as we move forward through this journey. So keep this work in mind when you begin to see that. So then in 1980 was the Olympics in Lake Placid, and I got asked to be a photographer during the games. And this was a photograph I made during that time. And that's about the same time I started to really develop a deeper exploration in color. And this is one of the things that happened here was these are two walls that come together. One is a perforated wall, the pink wall, and the yellow is solid. But to your eye, you see them both as solid walls, and it's a thing called similar contrast. And it's become a theme in my work, and even in my day-to-night work, you'll see me exploring color in a very unique way. Most of the work I'm sharing with you tonight is work that is deeply personal. Even though there may be individual shots that were done for maybe an assignment, there were pictures that I really had in my heart and that I had to do. This was one of those occasions. This was actually an assignment for Heinz Corporation, and they actually asked me to photograph great and famous New Zealanders. And this is A.J. Hackett, and I had this crazy idea that I thought, he jumps out of helicopters, I'd heard, and we sat down and had coffee together, and I said, A.J., do you think you could jump like over the Remarkable Mountains for me? And so I did this little thumbnail drawing of him jumping out of the clouds, and he said, I'll tell you what, I'll do it. One jump, that's it. Sunrise tomorrow morning, I'll get you another chopper, and we'll do it. And I got one shot, and he literally jumped out of the helicopter for me. And it was just one of those magical experiences where the idea that I was able to visualize something, actually drew it, and then see it in reality was a fantastic experience. And one that's quite rare, frankly. You know, at the time when I did this picture, I said it was my homage to Mary Poppins. This was 1983, and it was during the blizzard of 1983. And that's my umbrella going up almost 50 stories. I never thought that after, 9/11, I would see anything that even resembled what happened. So this is where I started to really develop, I think, an ability to sort of start looking at things that were difficult or painful to look at and try to make beautiful pictures out of them. So things that had social consciousness. This was a picture I did for the New York Times, and it was a photograph of the Staten Island fresh kills. And so one of the great things, they ran the photograph as a 2-page spread. And I remember vividly somebody writing in the editorial section to the letters to the editor, Mr. Wilkes made fresh kills look too pretty. Perhaps it should have been a scratch and sniff. So that was, and then this, of course, 9/11. I was documenting what is the tallest building in Lower Manhattan, and was able to get on the rooftop and saw this, and it's a picture that, frankly, I actually put away for almost 10 years because it haunted me, seeing the shadow of the North Tower actually in the light. So the big step for me in my work as an artist was I did my first book. It was called California One, and this was on the Pacific Coast Highway. And it was a fantastic experience because I had a brilliant designer and editor, a guy named Marty Goldstein, who actually was the founder of the Creative Black Book. And he had this idea. He said, Wilkes, I want you to make Southern California look hot and Northern California look cool. And that was it. So I spent 18 weeks photographing from as far north as Leggett to as far south as Dana Point. And this is where I started to explore the frame in a unique way. I began shooting with a panoramic camera, and I decided that I wanted to try to see things in a different way, in a broader way. So my vision started to really begin to expand when I began my journey with California One. This is Dockweiler Beach. This is all shot with film, by the way, so there's no digital or anything in this point in my career. Venice. One of the things I started to explore was, could you do a panoramic image and be intimate at the same time? And that's something that started to happen with this work. This was during the Huntington Beach Surf Festival. I tried to make pictures that were showing you the entire coast of California from a multitude of perspectives. And I think I wanted you to go on this journey with me. Half Moon Bay. I wanted to capture all the craziness, and my wife Betty was incredibly patient on this one. This is a bikini contest in Malibu. And this is a gentleman I met in Albion, and he, essentially I saw the tree and basically walked up to it and said, this is the most incredible thing, knocked on the door. Harold came out, and I looked at him, I said, I'd love to do a portrait of you, and we started talking, and he sat down on a stump, and I looked at him, I said, can I ask you, Harold, how many times do you trim this? He goes, every time I have an argument with my wife, I begin to trim. So that was incredible. This is a shot that never made it into the book because they said you don't have a model release. But if she does not look like their daughter, then nobody does. You know, there's that idea when you think about a photograph, and I had a very specific picture when I took this picture. I had gotten the photograph I wanted. I actually have a truck with redwoods, a yellow truck with redwoods driving along the Coast Highway. But something told me to stay a little longer. You know, it was so beautiful, and I had 2 more frames left of my four-shot roll of film. And this happened. The orange truck came by. And that's something that's so important as a photographer, is not getting satisfied too early. You know, we all think, you know, you see something that's great, and then you think you've got it. Take a deep breath, spend a little more time. What you will begin to get, I hope from my experience as a photographer, is that the depth that I go in making pictures, there's something to be said for it, and there's something that it communicates to you as a viewer. Taking your time. Big Sur. So this was really a wonderful first project because it allowed me to experience the coast and create a body of work that essentially was using a lot of the things that I love about the medium of photography. So my next big personal body of work was Ellis Island. And Ellis Island came into my orbit in a very unique way. You know, a lot of people think that I just come up with these ideas and they just, you know, happen. But the reality is sometimes a commercial project comes in, and it's that connection that allows me to sort of see a place. And suddenly it's only upon that experience that I realize this is much more than a one-day assignment. I want to spend the next 5 years of my life documenting this place. And I'm never afraid of doing that. So I will do the assignment. But if it's something I feel so connected to and passionate about, then I have to photograph it. So I had a one-day assignment for Encyclopedia Britannica from an old photo editor, a designer actually, the art director of Life magazine, called me and he said, Stephen, I know you love, you know, texture and, you know, patina. There's this place on the south side of Ellis Island. It was some old infectious disease hospital. It's essentially about to fall into the East River. Would you be interested in doing some pictures? I said, yeah. He said, well, here's the thing. They're only going to give you 1 hour. I go, 1 hour? Are you kidding me? So I said, well, I'll try. It just sounds so interesting. I never even knew, what is the south side of Ellis Island? I just knew Ellis Island as the Great Hall. So I ended up going out there, and it was like somebody literally raised the Titanic, opened the door, and said, would you like to check this out? Because I caught it when it was 50% the work of man and 50% the work of nature. It was literally this perfect marriage. And as I walked through the halls, I felt things that I never experienced in my life. And I completely got obsessed with it. So as I was literally trying to think about how possibly could I do this assignment in 1 hour, I want to spend the rest of my life in this place. It's so extraordinary. A gentleman walked out and he said, he walked out and he's actually wearing a white hazmat suit. So imagine me, I'm wearing a t-shirt, jeans. He's wearing a hazmat suit. Looks like something's radioactive. He takes his helmet off. I look at him and I go, what's the deal with the hazmat? Well, he says, you know, there is asbestos and lead paint out here. You need to be careful. I go, well, he goes, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm trying to photograph this place. And he said, well, I work for the New York Landmark Conservancy, and we're trying to show the government for a minimal amount of money, we could stabilize this place as a living room. I go, oh, this is the most incredible place I've ever seen. I'd love to be able to get involved and help you in some way. And we had a conversation. He said, well, do you do film? And I said, yeah, I've done video and whatever. And next thing you know, we met. And from that meeting, I created a video, and we raised $6.5 million. They presented it to Congress to stabilize Ellis Island as a living room. But the deal was, in order for me to do this, he asked me what I needed. So I said I needed unlimited access, and that happened for 5 years. So what you're going to see is 5-year documentation of Ellis Island on my own. It wasn't funded by anybody, but it was a passion project. And it started in this room, actually, at a point where I literally didn't even know if I was going to shoot black and white, color, 8x10, 4x5. I didn't know. So I was shooting, we were in an area, this is literally the first day that we were on the island. And I found out afterwards I was photographing in what was a children's measles ward. And I walked into the room, and it was literally just all these things going on. And my assistant, who's a very even-keeled guy, was, ready to load film. And as my normal behavior would be, I would literally say, hey, okay, Les, I'm going to take a walk. I'll be back in 10 minutes. Let's see what we'll do. I walked away for 10 minutes. I came back, and my very even-keeled, never too upset, never too sad assistant or happy, this very straight, even-keeled guys like my wonderful assistant Chris, who's here tonight. That's what I look for. And Les was on his knees when I walked in. He was chalk white, mumbling to himself. And I go, "What's wrong with you, man?" He goes, "Oh man, something just happened. I can't even begin to." He said, "I'm on my knees and I can feel somebody staring at me." He goes, "But they're not staring down at me. They were staring at me." So I said, "What did you do?" He goes, I slowly lifted my head up, and it was a little girl in a nightgown, and she ran into that room over there. So I immediately look at the room, and this is the room. I said to him, "You know what?" I walked into the room. It was almost 25 degrees cooler than any place else on the floor. I looked at Les, and I said, "Let's do a picture." And I set up an 8x10 camera, and this is a cross-process Polaroid. And when we peeled it, if you look closely in the shaft of light, you can actually see the shape of what looks like a nightgown and a little girl. It was, I never saw her until this picture, but I felt her. Les, my assistant, was really, really shaken by the whole experience. And at that point, after I pulled the Polaroid, I said, it's 11:30. It's time to have lunch. So we left, and we decided to have lunch. And as I walked into the main cafeteria on Ellis, I was met by the gentleman, Mark Weber, who I was working with at the Landmark Conservancy. And he says to me, Stephen, you guys look like something happened. What's wrong? I said, well, yeah, something did happen. Les saw a ghost. I felt her. What's the deal out there? He says, well, it's kind of a spectral hot zone, And I go, what does that mean? He goes, well, it's a lot of unresolved energy. And so as I began this journey, and this was the beginning of the journey, in a strange way, I felt I had an escort throughout all these pictures that you're about to see. And when I say escort, as a photographer, we discover things, right? It's sometimes you walk into a place, you see something, you go, I'm going to come back tomorrow morning. I'm going to come back at sunset. Light's going to be perfect. Well, Ellis Island didn't work that way. Ellis Island, the act of discovery and the act of photographing were simultaneous. And that's very rare to have it happen in almost every photograph you take. This was corridor number 9. This was considered the main corridor of the hospital. This is the book, the title of my book, Ellis Island, Ghosts of Freedom, which some of you may know. So this is what the hospital looked like in 1917. This was called the Women's Ward. And I found this photograph 4 years after I took this picture. And you can see the photographer essentially shot it from the exact same point of view, and it's the same room. So this is what it looked like when I began to explore on the island. Most of the work you're seeing in here, I had to wear a respirator for. When I describe the act of seeing the moment it happened, this is a perfect example. This light that hits this table only happens at 3:15 in the afternoon. If you're there at 3:10, you never see it. If you're there at 3:20, it doesn't exist. So this was the mental hospital. That's what, when you see color like this, generally the mental hospital had specially colored walls, painted walls. again, so much was left. In 1954, they closed the hospital, and essentially it was like they just left with the windows open. Everything about the hospital was form followed function. So you look at this and you see there are screen doors, interior screen doors. Why would you have interior screen doors? Well, it was about oxygen and flow of fresh air, because with tuberculosis, that was the only natural cure, fresh air. This was the boiler room. This is all shot with 4x5 film. I essentially created a zone system using film. And one of the things that I always say as you see my work progress, I was fortunate enough to have Ellis come into my life at a moment that I could actually deliver what I was seeing technically. So if it had happened 5 years earlier, I don't know if I could have done this. This is my first journey into taking architectural photography. But something happened in this journey. I started making pictures, and suddenly I was feeling things in these empty rooms. I started, as I told you, as a street photographer. And so as a street photographer, you have an instinct. You can feel things. You can sense when somebody's open, like I can take your picture, or no, don't even think of taking my picture. Well, I'd go into these empty rooms, and I started feeling energy like this, human energy. But I didn't really understand what I was feeling. And I'm not a ghost guy or anything, but I didn't know how to rationalize what I was experiencing. So I just took pictures. And the more pictures I took and the more I embraced it, the crazier things started happening. So this is one of those opportunities again. I walk in, this was called an autoclave, and this was used to sterilize mattresses. And what you're seeing is, not the heat is not on. What you're seeing is the setting sun from the outer room, which loaded the infected mattresses, and the room I'm shooting in is when the mattresses are clean or sterilized. And the outer wall had collapsed, and I happened to walk into this and literally see it in this moment when it was becoming essentially reanimated, coming back to life the moment I viewed it, the first time I viewed it. These were called the administrative quarters, where the top administrator would live on the island. And this is the TB ward, one of my favorite pictures from the whole series. And the story really was, I'd been down this road many times, been down this corridor many times. You know, once you spend weeks and months out on the island, I began to learn more about it. I knew more than, frankly, most of the park rangers knew. And I walked into this one TB ward. Something drew me in there. And it was really, I was looking at dead leaves and lead paint on the ground. And I just slowly bent down like this. I was about looking at the leaves and just admiring the pattern and the lead paint. And suddenly I slowly lifted my head up. I didn't stand straight up. I just was about 5 feet tall. And exactly at that height, I see a perfect reflection of the Statue of Liberty in that mirror. And immediately I got this image of an Eastern European woman. And all I could think about was her getting out of bed every morning, standing up and seeing that view. That's as close as she ever got to freedom. So the words, you know, so close yet so far, always resonated for me whenever I was on the island. This was also in the mental hospital, and I always felt that some type of interrogation took place in this room. Subsequently, when I started doing my research, I found out that it turns out that the psychiatric hospital on the island was actually used as an internment camp, and they were, Japanese, Americans, and Germans were interrogated. So it's fascinating how you can feel things in a photograph, right, that transport you in a way. Transport this. I always said that there's history in the light in these empty rooms. One of the things that's happened is in the act of stabilizing it as a living room, it's really changed it forever. So when the windows have been closed, the energy has changed, and it doesn't feel like it felt in these photographs. And I never realized as I was photographing that I was shooting history. You know, I in my mind, it was going to stay this way forever. She had become my muse in a way. Every free moment I had, I kept going back and thinking that it would just be this unbelievable thing that I could just keep studying and photographing. But suddenly things were changing, and the restorations started taking place, and the stabilization started changing everything. So suddenly I had to focus and realize that the window was closing, and I had to capture everything I wanted. This was the morgue. You know, Ellis Island, the south side of Ellis Island was the largest infectious disease hospital built in the world in 1907. And this was where any known disease came into the United States. They first identified it and studied it on this island. So they would actually have very, very large dissections and, you know, autopsies done with many, many doctors visible to actually see certain diseases for the first time. So it was really a teaching facility on a lot of levels. This is one of the last photographs I took on the island, and for me it was almost like life was regenerating again. You can see they started to clean and remove a lot of the paint, and many of the windows had been shut at this point. But I literally walked into the room and found this, and it was like a goodbye. This is a curved corridor. Again, form and function. You knew as a doctor or a nurse when you walked into a curved corridor, you were approaching a highly contagious infectious disease ward. So you had to prepare yourself. Huddled chairs in the dead of winter. Ellis Island was actually the first place they started experimenting with electroshock therapy. So all of this has been, you know, removed, and, you know, they really don't allow anything to grow anymore really on the island. This is what the island looked like when I got out there. You could literally not even see the buildings. If you pulled up by boat, you didn't even realize there were buildings there. That's how overgrown it was. People always comment, they go, what are you doing to the color? You're doing some kind of Photoshop thing here. So let me explain to you. Lead paint and island light is essentially like, and I've never done acid, but I guess that's what it's like to do acid as a photographer. It is an extraordinary combination, and that's really what you're seeing in these photographs. You're seeing island light, you know, the way light bounces off water, and you're seeing lead paint, and there is nothing that gives you color like lead paint. It's the deepest black. So I did that work, and because it was so powerful as raising awareness, it changed the way I thought about photography and what I could do as a photographer. I realized that I could actually create some kind of social change if my work spoke to people enough. So suddenly, you know, just creating pretty pictures wasn't enough for me anymore. I wanted that feeling. I wanted to know that I had inspired change somehow through my photographs. And Bethlehem Steel came into my orbit because Archaeology Magazine saw my work, and they recognized, they said, would you be interested in documenting the old Bethlehem Steel plant? It's going to be dismantled. And so what, again, was supposed to be a 3-day assignment became a 3-year project. So initially with this, I actually went out and I began to photograph with, it was like a sketchbook almost, but I used the Diana camera. And I just wanted to take quick pictures. But I sort of began to fall in love with the look of these photographs. They spoke about the time, the period of when the steel mill was running in a way. And I really enjoyed the spontaneity and the speed in which I was working with this. And I think that's an important thing, is I love all formats of photography, but I think each one gives you a different kind of rhythm. And that's something that's important. When you work with a large format camera, it's a very slow, methodical process. You're in deep thought and you spend time. When you're working with a 35 millimeter, it's about spontaneity. You're looking to grab something quickly. So how you integrate those two things is really, it's so important. What story is it that you want to tell? So that's what I always think about. So people always ask me, well, why did you decide to use that? It's all based on story. I feel like that's what I do, is I'm a storyteller. So I choose my format based on how, is it giving me the words, the visual words to communicate my ideas? So at this point, I started working with an 8x10 camera, and you can see there's such a difference in terms of the pictures. So Bethlehem really created this fascination with scale, and that's something that was a major kind of an aha moment for me also. And again, you're going to begin to see how that translated into my later work. So I also shot some color. These were the executive offices of Bethlehem Steel that had literally been closed for about 10 years when I got in there. And you can almost imagine, the chairman screaming to his secretary, "Get so-and-so on the phone," and everybody's heads popping out. These are the flywheels. Bethlehem, what was extraordinary about the experience was many of the things that I photographed were literally knocked down 20 minutes after I took a picture. That's not the case here, but this was the flywheels. These are, to give you an idea of scale, these are over 20 feet tall, and they are the things that drove, the energy in the plant, the Bessemer furnaces. And this was one of the most ironic pictures for me, was seeing those are the remnants of the actual buildings where they were gathering all the scrap metal that the plant was, built on. And they're, selling it off as scrap. But in the background was the Bessemer furnace, the thing that created the steel. And to me, steel is what baseball is to America, to American industry. It is such a unique place in our history. And I think, there's so much emotion connected to this plant, meeting so many of the people that lived and worked there. And now are working for, a company that was dismantling it. It was very, very powerful. This was a thing called a welfare room. And this room was actually knocked down 20 minutes after I took this picture. One of the other things, this was shown in Santa Fe, New Mexico, at one of my galleries. And if you see on the top right, there's a name. A young woman walked into the gallery, and she walked up to this photograph, and she started hysterically crying. And my gallerist went over to her and said, "Is everything okay?" She goes, "Yes, but that's my father. That was his name on that tag. That was his basket." So people would take their personal belongings and literally tether them to the ceiling. And you can see, when I walked in there, it seems like just everybody left, like it was a coffee break. Nobody came back to work. It subsequently has been bought by the Sands, and they have actually done a really great thing because they somehow saved the essential skeleton of the factory, and also they created an art center, and I think it's really rejuvenated the area. So I was very happy to see that it wasn't leveled and condominiums weren't built. This is one of the gentlemen who showed me around, Albert, who's that's the actual. He ran the press that extruded the steel that built the Empire State Building. And this is what the plant looks like, along the Lehigh River, under moonlight. So that led me to another series of work called Burned Objects. And, one of the themes of my work you'll see is time, memory, history. These are all things I'm really fascinated by. I had done a project for, again, a commercial project, and I had to do a portrait of a firefighter. And we went into a house where there was a gas explosion. And I looked around and started seeing these things that were on the ground, and I was completely overwhelmed. And I began to collect these things as sculpture. I never had any intent really of photographing them. I just found them as stunningly beautiful. And somehow you saw an event and then time frozen within that event. And it was very powerful visually to me. Then there was a thing, the 20 by 24 Polaroid camera came out. And when that happened, suddenly I remember going with my mentor, Jay Maisel, and Jay and I went and I did a picture of him, he did a picture of me, and Jay, I think I had a little cut on my face from shaving, and I remember looking at the print and going, "Oh my God, the detail's crazy." I could feel the cut in my face, and I thought, wow, wonder if I could view those burned things I have that big, like scale them up that big. And so that was really the impetus to create this body of work called Burned Objects. So I would shoot them in the Polaroid studio. And if you ask John Ruder who is the most difficult stuff he's ever done with the Polaroid 2024, I think my name will come up because the magnification on some of these is incredible. And the amount of energy to get the detail and stuff that we did. So the first one was, this was an actual West clock alarm clock. It was like a Salvador Dali almost. An aerosol spray can. And I shoot the front and back of each object. And this was an 8-track cassette player, which I love the warning in case of fire. Again, an alarm clock. An old telephone. And part of this idea was, that you see something actually that I'm just looking at it now. I couldn't decide which side I liked better. So I shot the front and the back. And, when you see day to night emerged because I couldn't decide which time of day I liked better, And my brother really generated this idea. I have an identical twin. And he brought me this camera. This was actually the first burn thing I'd ever seen. And it was, some guy brought it into a camera shop, and my brother saw it and wanted to make a sculpture with my hands holding the camera. He never made the sculpture, but he gave me the camera. And it really did plant a seed. I became fascinated by the residual and the infinite beauty of decay, This is a bullet, an actual bullet that exploded. That's this big. We're talking about an inch and a half. And that's the lead from a bullet, liquefied. And this was a puppet that I found in that fireman's house. So that led me to another body of work. I got commissioned by Epson, and they asked me to if I could shoot anything I wanted in the year 1999 to do in 2000, what would it be? And I said, wow, let me think about this. I almost broke the glass of wine I was drinking. And I thought to myself, wow, I've always been a student of the history of photography, and a millennial portrait. I think about where photography was 100 years ago and where photography is today. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool to capture America in the year 2000, go across America? So they loved the idea, and I spent 52 days on the road straight creating this body of work called America in Detail. And we created, literally, I look at the map of the United States and made nodal points that what could I do, where could I go that would capture the full flavor and the essence of where we are as a nation in the year 2000. So this is one of the famous Tuskegee Airmen on Memorial Day. And so many of these pictures were really about discovery. I wanted to do a picture in Grand Central, found this beautiful view, and realized, boy, I need a subject. And there I saw this very sweet little man. I never saw him before. He's the guy who cleans up everything in Grand Central. Why things look so clean all the time. There's never anything on the floors, and he was there, and I asked him very kindly if he would mind posing for me, and he did, and it really made the picture, I think. This is in Garnavillo during the 4th of July. I was using a Spiratone, get this one, from the 1950s, side view mirror, mounted to a camera. This kid never knew I was taking this picture. He was eating that thing like he's in his closet at home before mom comes home. And I realized, oh man, I got a great picture. And then of course we had to get him in front and say, hey, could we use this? Because every shot that you see here, I had to have model releases on. We went into a coal mine in Virginia. And this is Iowa. And the greatest compliment I always get is whenever I show this picture, somebody from Iowa looks at me and goes, man, did you get Iowa? Are you from Iowa? Because you got Iowa. They really. We were storm chasing in North Dakota. This is the stock market in the good old days, which it's come back quite a bit, but this was really a crazy time in the market in the 2000s. LA. A lot of times, so I went to a mannequin factory because everybody's so in LA, you know, it's all about how you look. And so I decided, let's go to a mannequin factory. I want to photograph faces. Blues Club in Chicago. And this was, I read an article in the Wall Street Journal about this place in Region, North Dakota. And it was called the Enchanted Highway. And this guy, Gary Graff, would literally, his whole town was basically forgotten because a major highway went in and nobody went through the town anymore. So he had this idea, build it and they'll come, to create this thing called the Enchanted Highway. So he'd take all these like spare parts, whatever he could salvage from all his local businesses, and he would build these gigantic things. And I read about it and I said, I got to go photograph this thing. So I literally pulled up, that was his nephew mowing the lawn under the grasshopper they built. It's worth a trip if you're ever around Region, North Dakota. This was a recreation of Custer's Last Stand. One of the things that this project was, I shot all film, but we were printing electronically for the first time. And it enabled me to begin to realize the potential of where photography was going as a medium. And I remember when this work was first shown, people would walk up to my prints like this with like magnifying glasses because nobody could believe that these were, you know, inkjet. This was in Harlem. A tractor graveyard in Iowa. And Alaska. And then the Field of Dreams, which was one of my all-time favorite experiences. And just an amazing experience to, we actually played a game after we took this picture. But so many things have to break. This was one of the worst weather days I'd ever had in my life, and I just thought, well, I guess I'm not going to really get it. And I set my camera up, and all of a sudden the sky starts parting, the fog comes out, and the woman who owns the field, the two farmers owned the field at this time, and they really didn't get on very well. It was like the Hatfields and the McCoys. I mean, they really didn't like each other. Two separate roads even to get in. And I took the picture, and my producer who I was working with looked at me. She said, Stephen, you're not getting the sunset, are you? I said, well, of course I'm getting the sunset. What do you think I'm doing? She says, well, we have permission from the person who owns right and center. We don't own left and third base. So that's the other farmer who owns that. So we have to get their permission. I said, you better get his permission too. So because, and that's the honest to God truth, what happened. It was like, who's on first? This was a guy, Pastor Anderson, who's into snake worshiping. And he preached in front of my camera for about 35 minutes. And I found myself going, yes. I was just, I mean, it was mesmerizing. The way he projected his energy at me. I was thinking of Walker Evans when I shot this picture. Harlem. Mayflies. And these are bow fishermen in Alabama. So that takes me to China. And China was something I came back to. So my twin, I mentioned, he had started doing business in China. And I remember him calling me up on the phone and saying, you've got to go back to China. You cannot believe what's going on. So 27 years later, I revisited China. And it really was extraordinary. So what you're going to see now is how I've kind of rationalized that experience, this amazing experience as a young college student to see China in 1978, 2 years after Mao had died, 2 years after the Cultural Revolution ended, to come back 27 years later and see one of the oldest cultures in history essentially change in warp speed is extraordinary. So what I started seeing was the scale in which the Chinese do everything. And that has become a very important theme in my work. But I really developed it and honed that in China. I went to Guilin because I wanted to see where the master landscape paintings were done. And I always used to think they exaggerated everything. There couldn't be mountains that actually look like that. But I was wrong, they are. Then I started becoming fascinated by the factories. And, you know, they're using hand labor with state-of-the-art technology. This is the largest sock factory in the world. One of the things I was drawn to was I wanted to humanize the Chinese in a way. So even though I'd go in these factories, I always tried to connect with one person. This is actually the Nike factory. It's called Yuyen, which is literally, and I'm not exaggerating, there are about 30,000 people, 5,000 a floor, making sneakers. And everybody goes to lunch at about 11:30, and it looks like Yankee Stadium emptying in the fifth inning. This is one of the oldest bridges in all of China, in Guilin. And this is some of the things that you see happening because, you know, China really, the core of the culture obviously is based on Mao and what Mao's beliefs were. And, you know, that was really about live for the future. You know, you don't have to live in the past. And so what you see is so much of old China disappearing. And part of my relationship to China has been to try to capture what my memory of China was versus what China is becoming, and sort of, you know, connect the two in some way. This is the Jintao Tower. Now these are all Hutong's. Again, this is the performing arts building that's called the Egg in Beijing. When I made this picture, I didn't realize that all this was going to disappear within a year later. And this was one of my favorite moments. Sometimes as a photographer, when you least expect it, you make your best picture, right? When you've put the cameras away and you said, you know, I'm just going to enjoy this. We had to wait about 8 hours for our plane, so I decided to go to a museum in between. And it was raining, and we'd spent 3 weeks killing ourselves in China. And I went to this place called the 798 Space, and we literally walked in, and I saw this wall like this. And this is a Bauhaus building built in the 1920s. And this red wall, they had just had a kite exhibit up, and they'd taken the kites away, but the wall was still standing. And I looked at it, and I looked at my assistant, and I said, oh my God, we got to do a picture here. So we take the camera out, we get everything set up, and I'm looking, and I'm going, I need somebody, I need a subject. And all of a sudden, as if like the gods heard me, this little boy runs into the room, and he's got his father next to him, and I see him, he's got the red shirt on, the grape, and he's adorable. And I turn to my translator, could you please communicate to his father, tell him I'd love to do a portrait. And so I get him, his name is Sam, same name as my son who is here this evening, and I'm so thrilled that he is. And he literally stood in front of me, and I said, okay, Sam, I want you to just relax. And first thing he does is goes like this, like John Travolta. I go, no, just calm down, you know. And you can see how much Western influence has affected this generation. And next thing he's moving, and then all of a sudden, for one moment, he just goes like this. And that was the picture. And it's like my favorite picture from all the pictures I've done, because for me, this picture is about the weight of history comes through this kid. And it's really exciting when that happens. So you never know when that best moment is going to come. These are some of the things that are disappearing. This is an old apothecary that virtually are disappearing now. Yeah, I kind of like this, you know, Ronald McDonald, America, China standing, you know, you are, we're still relative, aren't we? And then, of course, look at the brands in the background. And this is the scale in which they're building. It's really extraordinary on so many levels. This was during the Olympics. This is the data center as it was under construction. And then I started to want to see these really epic mega projects. So this is Three Gorges Dam. And this is the backside of Three Gorges Dam. And talk about killing the stonemason. To give you an idea of scale, you can see those are people on the bottom, and that's a car. Those are all individual stones that go all the way up. So this was a moment where, some of the things that you don't necessarily get an opportunity to see as your average tourist. I wanted to see where the development of the Three Gorges Dam, how it affected and it's essentially bifurcated what was a beautiful community. And I found this view on top of a building, and it just was kind of earth-shattering because it was like I was looking at two pictures. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And one of the, I'm going to show you, this is what it looks like when you move into the photograph. This is where I started to begin to understand the powerful ability that now, photography in terms of storytelling and using scale to really tell a story. So this picture was kind of a breakthrough picture for me. And one of the things I watched was I was in awe over the fact that the Chinese could adapt to anything. The fact that that this line, this wall, it was almost like a filter. Somehow they would cross through. It never affected their life. They would just adapt. And I wondered if we could adapt like that. This is in a place called Westlake. It was one of the first trips I made to China. I went back and was saddened because it had been so overdeveloped from my memory of what it was. On this, I was doing a project on water, and I found this woman. It's a reflection of her in a well, and it's in a remote village. And I couldn't get out of my head that she looked like literally a propaganda poster from 1940. I love propaganda art, and I study it. And when I saw her, I said it was almost like I was viewing a time machine. And this is also an aspect of China that's disappearing too. Is this so many people are being asked to be relocated into the cities, giving up their farmlands and their homes. It's really, I've watched China evolve from wanting to be the manufacturer of the world to now wanting to drive technology. At first it was the farmer of the world, then the manufacturer, and then technology. But I think the single biggest issue in China is when you have to move. And I was on an island, and it was deemed an island that was actually one to become an industrial island. So all the homes had to be leveled. And I happened to get there and did this picture of this family. And I came back 3 days later, and this was their house. And it was really encapsulated, I think, and showed in a very dramatic way what I think is the single biggest issue there is for the people who have to, live with that change. But that's the power of one, that's why they can build infrastructure at a speed that's unprecedented. But it was a very powerful reminder of, what happens. This was in Yellow Mountain, which is where some of the great landscape paintings were done. And just a moment. It's actually a piece of garbage with a pull top connected to it. And I decided I wanted to try to find old China if I could just get to a place where I could see these old places. And so I found in the Gobi Desert what I was looking for. This is called grape sheds, and this is one of the biggest photographs I've ever done. These are made out of the natural soil that you see. They create these bricks, and they store these succulent grapes in them, and they turn them into raisins. Yes, that's a panorama. It's actually 3 photographs together. So this is where my work started to explore more documentary. First was Hurricane Katrina, and I, like all of us, I was, incredibly shocked, depressed, frustrated seeing those images. But I decided that rather than go down while it was happening, I wanted to go visit the story when everybody was leaving. So at 6 months, I went down to New Orleans to photograph. And I was working with the World Monument Fund, and they were doing a project in Holy Cross. And through coincidence, the guy I was working with is the same guy I worked with on Ellis Island. And his name is Mark Weber. And Mark said to me, what are you up to? And I said, I'm going down to New Orleans to shoot. He goes, oh my gosh, we got to talk because I'm doing this project in Holy Cross. Maybe we could connect. And what ended up happening was this beautiful marriage, because I went and initially thought I'm going to just, see things and shoot devastation photos, but nothing could prepare me for what I saw. And I ended up going to a town hall meeting, and I started to meet people who you see here, Caroline Parker, and their stories and their individual acts of heroism was so powerful that I decided that was the story I wanted to tell. So you will see now the beginning of this series. That's Caroline in her house. She essentially lived there. Nobody, and I mean nobody, was living in Holy Cross. She and her brother gutted it themselves and managed to eke out their lives and rebuild their lives in I think, really against all odds. Noel Fay, Bay St. Louis. I shot 2 communities, Holy Cross and Bay St. Louis. So we ended up showing this work. World Monument Fund had an exhibition with the stories behind these pictures and the people behind these photographs. He gave me about 30 seconds to do this picture. That's how important his work was to him and his community. And Melanie Mitchell, who just blew my mind with her spirit. She's a cancer survivor, had 9 people, family members, living in a trailer. And when I walked up, this is what her house looked like. And she said to me, Stephen, I actually got something you might be interested in. I said, what's that, Melanie? She says, I found my wedding dress. And I was like, oh my goodness, can you get it? And so she took it out and we did this picture. Patsy's story. She saved more animals than anybody else in the whole lower Ninth Ward. To give you an idea how high the water was, it was just below the balcony. And then there's Charles Gray, who was really one of the most extraordinary people I've ever met. He can trace his family roots down to King George. And he had an extraordinary art collection. You cannot believe what this man lost. And this is, I photographed him in Bay St. Louis after the storm, 6 months afterwards. You're going to see a picture. I revisited Caroline and Charles again, and 9 years later, and you're going to see what they look like now. So this was Charles Banks, who lost his daughter in this house, and I'd say that's probably the hardest photograph I've had to make. He asked me would I do a portrait of him in the house that his daughter died in. So I did it, and it was absolutely an unbelievable experience. And there are people like Mark Hoonan, who's 75 years old. When I met him, he was literally gutting 3 houses by himself because he had no insurance, no help, nothing. And he just went about doing his work. He just didn't say anything, didn't complain. He just did the job. Somehow for me, when you look at Mark's eyes, that's the story. That's the thing that happened. That is the single most powerful moment I could ever ask for, is what's in his eyes. That conveys really what happened. So I made other pictures. This was one that became important. And it began a journey for me also about making pictures that I think resonate almost a post-apocalyptic feeling in the way things are going with this world. This was a TV in the sand. It was a very powerful metaphor for me of how, the media had sort of left 6 months into the storm. This was a prayer box. This church is rebuilt now. So that led me to revisiting New Orleans again, but unfortunately this was for another disaster that I no one anticipated, and that was the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. And again, I'm showing you this was initially an assignment by Time Magazine, but it became a personal project because I have a deep love for the people of New Orleans. And when this event happened, I was sickened like everybody was. So Time asked me to go out, and actually the day that the oil was to be capped, they asked me to go photograph it. And something happened when I got out there that struck me. I couldn't believe how little oil it was on the surface of the water. I thought, my goodness, this thing has been belching oil for weeks, millions of gallons of oil. How is that possible? And as I began to look at this fleet of ships that were out and about, I realized there was something else going on here, and they were using a dispersant that people are now very familiar with. It's called Corexit. And what that does is it essentially, well, it breaks apart the molecule of oil. It disperses it, but it does not destroy it. It just literally, like in a sense, almost like a microorganism level. And so the scary part about that is it FedExes it to every known species. You know, it's no longer just the fish that get it. It's the plankton and everything. And, you know, the beautiful thing about it is it takes it off the surface, so you don't really think there's a problem. But there's a problem. So these were some of the pictures I made initially. And again, I start by making photographs of things that are difficult, but what I try to do is I use the word the power of beauty. I want you to look at this, and I want to access you in a way, just for a moment. You might look at it. If I showed you it in a different way, you might not flip the page. You may not even have it. It won't enter your consciousness. So I feel that beauty, and in a way, accesses your consciousness. And that's what I try to do when I do these shoots. So one of the things I became fascinated with was I wanted to take what was happening out of context in a way. So I set up a tent and worked on my own and befriended somebody who was working with the Wildlife Conservancy to save some of these animals that were soiled with oil. And this is a northern gannet that I took one frame of. You know, it's a live animal. But again, I wanted to play off, it's almost the beauty of it, right? It looks like an Audubon etching, right? But there's something else going on here. This is an animal that's, you know, all the wings are soiled with oil. This was a baby crab, a pregnant crab that was covered in oil. And then I made this startling revelation. I was out on one of the islands looking for wildlife that had been affected by the spill. And I didn't see any wildlife. I kept finding plastic, though. Huge amounts of plastic covered in oil. And I gathered all this stuff, and I brought it back to my hotel room, and I set up a still life studio, and I started photographing it, because this is an issue. There's two sides to this issue, right? We all love using plastic, but we hate what happens when oil spills, right? It's this weird duality to it. And in a way, these images speak to that. I found out after this that New Orleans has no recycling laws. That's a problem. And this is what that Corexit looks like when it hardens on a beach. So I got the Annenberg Museum asked me if I would be interested in going back and revisiting some of the places I photographed during Hurricane Katrina and Sandy. And so there was an exhibit called Sink or Swim, and I was part of that. I was one of 5 photographers who was part of that. And so this is the levee that I shot 6 months after Katrina. This is the levee the way it looks today. And you can see, you know, there's pretty much a whole community now redeveloped there. This was the view from the bridge that leads into the lower 9th Ward. This is what it looks like now. This is after Brad Pitt did his Make It Right homes, which were really extraordinary, and I think really brought vitality and life back to the area. This is Caroline Jones when I first met her 9 years ago. And, you know, like all things, you've seen some improvements. Well, Caroline's life hasn't really improved very much. When I walked up and knocked on her door, she recognized me immediately and said, "Stephen, same old, same old." My neighbor, he's still got a tree growing through his roof. That school across the street is imploding. Nobody's doing anything here. So as much change has happened in New Orleans, so much more has to happen. And that's something that's important, is honesty as a documentary photographer. You know, you have to show both sides of the story. This is Charles 9 years ago. This is Charles today. He rebuilt his house about 5 blocks away. And it wasn't his original home, obviously. He found this incredible Victorian and literally restored it to its original grandeur. And he's such a beloved figure in the community. Everyone knew that Charles had lost all these wonderful trinkets and collections. Well, because the tide came in so far, people started discovering things in their backyards. So many of his objects were returned to him. It's really quite extraordinary. So I rented a helicopter 9 years later, and I was awestruck because somebody had bought a house, rebuilt it all, and fixed it, but they never looked up on the roof. And that's one of the original messages from 9 years earlier. And this is one of the locals now who lives in the Make It Right homes. So then I shot Hurricane Sandy. And Sandy was very personal to me because it was part of the New York area. You know, it's here, it's our home. And I got a phone call from Time Magazine. Kira Pollack, the photo editor, called me and she said, Stephen, do you know a thing called Instagram? I go, yeah, I know what Instagram is. She goes, well, we had this crazy idea, but we'd love you involved. She said, would you be interested in covering the storm and actually posting your photos real time on our Instagram feed as it's happening? We're having like 5 other photographers. You're going to cover Connecticut. We'll have somebody in New York, you know. I go, wow, it sounds kind of amazing. Yeah, I'm game. So I ended up doing it. And so I did, this was a shot I ended up obviously posting. This was what they call Devil Low Tide. So to give you an idea, this is in a place in Connecticut, Milford, Connecticut. And what you're seeing is, that's Devil's Low Tide. Look how high that water is. That's when I knew this was going to be different and bigger than anything I'd ever seen. So I posted pictures like this, you know, hey, Sandy, come and get me. Because everybody was kind of like not really taking it seriously. Well, it's going to be a category 1 or 2. What's the big deal? And then there was the afterwards. I went out and started seeing what my neighbors had, what happened to them. And it was devastating. And that's when I realized that as much as I told the story, I wasn't really telling the story. And I felt the media in general wasn't getting the story. So on my own, I called up a friend of mine who's a great helicopter pilot out in Long Island. And I said to him, can you get me up in the air? Is there any way you can get me up? I want to go all the way to New Jersey. I want to fly across, you know, Long Island. I want to see it all. He said, yeah, I've got a generator. We can get gas. We can do it, Stephen. So I went up for 3 hours, and I'd heard, there was a rumor that there was a roller coaster in Seaside Heights that was in the ocean. So we went straight up and went to Seaside Heights. And as we hovered over the water, the pilot looked at me. His name is Al Cirillo. He's a very, very famous pilot, and he's been doing this for years. He looked at me and he said, you know something? I've been doing this for 25 years, man. I have never, ever seen the Atlantic Ocean this calm in my life. And it was, the sand had dredged up underneath it, so that's why the water has this turquoise color. And as I turned and we banked over it, I had this extraordinary image that, you know how film affects you, you know, art affects you. I always say to people, immerse yourself in art because art gives you so much. Well, there's a film that touched me as a kid. It was Planet of the Apes, the original. And when Charlton Heston was riding horseback on that beach and he comes across the torch of the Statue of Liberty rising out of the water, that image really hit me. That image of a post-apocalyptic Earth. And when I flew over this roller coaster that had been physically grabbed and ripped off of a pier, I was left with this overwhelming image that I was viewing something that was post-apocalyptic, that somehow there was something underneath this that was a powerful message. And I made the picture, and it became a very well-known image from the storm. We actually did a special limited edition prints, and I sold them to raise money for so many of the people whose lives were ruined, especially in the Seaside Heights community. So I traveled in my helicopter over Staten Island, I'd heard that homes were physically lifted and dragged through cattails. And I found this. And then I went out to Long Island and saw where all these homes had been, this horrible fire that took so many firemen that worked in unbearable conditions to try to control. I saw scars on the land that were unimaginable. I was really emotional because all of these places I know, I've spent summers with our family and our children out on Atlantic Beach. And seeing Atlantic Beach, I remember I flew over the Sands Hotel. I couldn't believe what I was looking at. You know, I spoke to family members out in the West Coast, and everybody goes, well, what's the big deal? It's just a Category 2. You know, the idea of numbers is giving a scale for what exactly happened. You know, I photographed Katrina. I'm telling you, Sandy was way bigger than Katrina. This was in Manatong in New Jersey, Staten Island. And that was in the Rockaways. That's the remnants of everybody's homes. Those are all everybody's personal belongings put together in one gigantic parking lot for 18-wheel trucks to load them. And then I got, you know, you're going to see I did a day tonight of Coney Island, and I got friendly with the folks who own the Wonder Wheel and Dino's Wonder Wheel. And I'd heard that they got badly hit, and I went out there I wanted to do a story for Time, and Time said, yeah, go over there. And he said to me, the owner said, Stephen, you got to go into the haunted house, man, because all the water went into the house. I mean, we had 8 feet of water go through the haunted house. So this is a photograph from that. And this was when I revisited about a year later, Sandy. This is Staten Island, and this is really, to me, the essence of where it's all going. You know, the earth will be here. We may not be, but the earth will. And this pictures the way the earth really reclaims everything, even this house. So now I'm going to show you another story that was very personal to me. It was a story I did for Vanity Fair on Bernard Madoff. Everybody had a certain impression about who was really hurt in the Madoff scandal and what had happened. And I remember calling Susan White, the photo editor, and explaining to her that I had a deep connection, a personal family connection to what had happened. And I wanted to really tell this story. And I felt that the mainstream media was not telling this story. And she put me in touch with Mark Seal, who was the writer, and we had a conversation. And he said, I got to have Stephen Wilkes on this project. And so I figured out a way to tell this story. And so this is one of the pictures. This is, of course, the building where it all took place. The 3 floors that are lit were actually at the epicenter of the investigation. But this was the main floor where all the damage was done. It was the 17th floor. And I'll share quickly this story with you guys. I basically ended up, I had a friend who worked at Madoff. He offered to get me access into the building. I told him all I'm interested in is getting in the elevator and getting the elevator to open on 17. I'm not going to walk on 17. I don't care about it. All I want to do is get up there. Because in my mind, it was the Wizard of Oz, what's behind the curtain. If I could get on 17, that's the opening picture for the story. So he said, no problem. I get up there. I get in the elevator. I go up to his floor. He's on 19. And he says, no problem. Just as far as you're concerned, this never happened. I go, right, never happened. I get in the elevator. Doors close, and I hit 17. Guess what? Doesn't light up. It's locked. I go, oh, man. I'm wearing a wide-angle lens, about a 15-millimeter lens on my chest, zipped up like this. And now I'm moving down. And I know there are cameras in the elevator, and I know that once the elevator doors open, I'm not going to be able to get this picture. Suddenly, the elevator stops on the 3rd floor. And in walks a gentleman. He's got a white shirt, a tie. He's got a BlackBerry. He's very busy. He takes his wallet out, and he goes like this. And he hits 17. I'm like looking, I'm going, you know, goes up to 17. I hit 1, but it's going up first. He walks out of the elevator, and as he's walking out, my camera is up, and I shoot 3 frames as the doors open. Bang. Get my picture. This was about 2 days of going through a building to get a view from a private apartment of Bernie's lair and the penthouse lair that he had on Madison Avenue. And this was probably the most difficult picture I had to make. This was literally the week before Ruth, or the weekend before Ruth gave up the apartment. And it's the only window that was open where you could actually see into the apartment. I shot this with an 1800 millimeter lens. This is not visible with your eye, to give you an idea. But it became a very powerful photograph because the headline was, "What's Ruth hiding?" And that's what we all wanted to know. And the only reason it's open is because I think they had a wireless, an actual wire cable feed to the internet. And so rather than, they couldn't really close the shade. And that's the only reason probably that this window was left open like this. But boy, did it make a great picture for me. So these were the victims that I began to photograph and tell some of their stories. It was really an incredible experience. I shot video also, and I encourage you to go online maybe and check them out, because these people are incredible people, all of them, and they all were totally destroyed by Madoff. This is Jack and Rose Less, who I became very close with, and this was their 69th wedding anniversary. And Rabbi Mark Gelman, who's an incredible rabbi out in Long Island. So now we go to Day to Night. And Day to Night is, well, I think it's safe to say it's the essence of everything I love about photography. So I've shared with you this progression, this journey of my work, of how I sort of evolved as a photographer. And I guess it's 6 years ago I started this project, and it was at a point historically when video was becoming the craze, right? Everybody's saying the death of still photography, and what else can you do with it? Still, everybody's going to shoot video, still is dead. And I really kind of took offense to that, and I began to think about, why goodness, this is one of the most exciting moments in the history of photography, because technology can allow us to do things now we could never even imagine before. And so I've always been, as you've seen in my work, I've embraced change and innovation. And I'm not very comfortable just staying with the status quo. And so I was inspired. When I was 14 years old, I went to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and I saw a painting that changed my life. It was The Harvesters by Bruegel the Elder. And one of the things that struck me about this painting, not only had I never seen a landscape painting like this, but I saw a narrative, a storytelling narrative using people and scale in a way I'd never seen it before. And that really struck me, and it stayed with me for many, many years. Subsequently, about 16 years ago, I got an assignment from Life magazine, and I was asked to photograph Romeo and Juliet, the Baz Luhrmann film, and the stars were Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes. And so Life said to me, "Stephen, we want you to pay homage to the great big pictures that were done in the 1940s, where the cast and crew would physically be in the shot with everybody. So you get every single person who ever was involved in making this film in the photograph." So I said, "Great." And they said, "We want you to do it as a gatefold panoramic, so 3-page gatefold." So I said, "Fantastic." So I get down to Mexico City, and guess what? The set's a square. So this is my first big Life thing. I'm going, this is crazy. What am I going to do? How do I make a square into a panoramic? Well, David Hockney was doing these wonderful photo collages right in that moment. And I was very inspired by what Hockney was doing, because he could take a scene and open it up in a way. And I thought, wow, if I could take the square, shoot 250 images sequentially, and then I could take this square and open it into a panoramic, I could create something really different, and I could solve the problem. And that's what I did. So I got everybody in the shot, and I'm shooting with my camera, and I'm literally taking picture after picture. Everybody's holding still, hold still, hold still. And as I pan my camera all the way around, there's this huge mirror on the right-hand side. And I notice reflecting in the mirror is Claire and Leonardo. You see in the close-up shot here, you can see they're embracing in the center of the picture. But in the mirror, I looked at that. That was a separate moment, and I said, Could everybody stay exactly as you are? But Claire and Leonardo, I need you to kiss for this one exposure. And they kissed. And I went back home. And a week later, I spent God knows how much time putting this image together. I have such respect for Hockney. I could not believe how much time it took me. And finally, when I looked at the whole thing and it was finished, I go, wow, change time in a picture. And that concept stayed with me for 16 years. So what you're going to see is there was a thing called Photoshop that was invented. And that was the game changer for me. That allowed me to compress time in a single photograph. So this was the first one. And this originated because of an assignment. I was doing a project for New York Magazine. Jody Kwan, the photo editor there, for many years, and a friend, she called me. She said, Stephen, I want you to do the definitive image of the High Line. So I said, well, Jody, wow, you know, it's this amazing thing. When you're on it, you can almost recognize people on the street, but yet you can see people in the windows, in the buildings. It's got this unique scale that is New York. So I went and scouted it and said, you know what? To do the High Line justice, you have to replicate what the High Line feels like. So I need to be in a cherry picker. And she said, no problem. And, well, I started talking to her, and I go, you know, I scouted it at lunchtime. It's super cool. But, you know, at night, it's really kind of spooky. And I had this idea, suddenly, this intersection where things come to you, right? I said, what happens if I did north to south, day to night in one picture? And she goes, oh, my God, that would be incredible. Could you do that? And I go, I can try. And I remember my wife, Betty, sitting behind me in the office. She turned to me and looked at me. She goes, are you out of your mind? But we did it. This was the first one. And then, sure enough, they called me back, and they said, we're doing a Christmas issue. Do you think you could do a vertical day tonight? And I said, my son Sam was actually visiting NYU, and we're on top of the Kimmel Center, and we're going for this orientation. And my wife is going, what are you doing? Why are you not listening? And I'm like, looking out the window, my mouth is agape, because the view from the Kimmel Center, this is the view. And I'm thinking, oh, is this unbelievable? I literally walk out of the Kimmel Center, the phone rings, and it's Jody. Could you do a vertical? Do you have an idea where you would shoot? I go, oh, do I have an idea where I'm going to shoot? And that's exactly how it happened, literally. So one of the things, let me explain the process a little bit, because I've gotten behind that. What I do is I shoot from a single point of view. And I start with what I say is things that are part of our collective memory. So things that everyone is familiar with, right? Times Square, you know, Central Park. You've seen them, you've read about them, you've heard them, whatever, you've experienced it. Then I shoot them in a way you've never seen it before. So the perspective of being maybe 50 feet in the air, finding an angle that you've never seen it before. And then I change time. So it's on multiple levels. And one of the things I'm fascinated by is I've looked at the concept of what time is, right? Time is this thing we can never put our hands around. It always escapes us. Yet I've thought about this, and the idea of compressing all these moments of a single day into one picture became something I became obsessed with. And I realized that with technology now, I can do this. I can photograph from morning until night, and I take the best moments that happen throughout the day and into the night, and then we layer them seamlessly together into one picture. And so what you're seeing is, this is basically a checkerboard. This gives you an idea of the detail that's in my work. So I shoot essentially with what is equivalent to an 8x10 digital back, and I'm able to create a narrative with all these specific moments. So this is not me running a camera for 15 hours. This is me being a street photographer from 50 feet in the air on average for 12 to 15, and in some pictures I'm going to share with you 30 hours of work. So in this picture, time is checkerboarding. So wherever there's shadow, it's night, and wherever the sun hit, it's day. And that's because Times Square is a canyon. So sunlight never hits it all at once at any one moment. So I was able to checkerboard time. And the vector of time is a very important element to all these photographs. I look at a scene and I go, okay, time is going to go from left to right, top to bottom, diagonally. I decide on the vector, and then I religiously focus my eye based on time as time changes. And all those moments that we shoot throughout the day and the night, we have a system where we mark images based on time. And so I know at the end of the day, okay, everything is shot sequentially. So, I just know where things are based on time. And a lot of my pictures, this was 9/11 on 2010. And the city of New York gave us permission through my wife's incredible connections and relationships over the years to actually put a 170-foot crane on the side of Fifth Avenue. So I'm floating above Fifth Avenue. We don't have a bathroom up there, guys, so I know that question is going to come at some point. But I wanted, when they said you could do it on 9/11, I immediately thought, my God, that means we're going to get the memorial lights on Fifth Avenue. So I knew Fifth Avenue was going to be at night. And one of the beautiful things about the Flatiron is it's a mirror of itself. And of course, you have Broadway and Fifth that literally come together and split at that point. So it was really an ideal situation to tell this narrative. And I felt like it's a shot. I don't think you can do a series on New York without acknowledging what happened that day. But I feel that this picture has great hope, and it shows that as a city, we've moved on. We never forget, but we've moved forward. So this was a shot that actually CBS Sunday Morning filmed me creating. This is Bethesda Fountain. Again, this is from about a 150-foot crane. And, so many things have to happen and work right to make these pictures. If I get more than 10-mile-an-hour gusts when I'm in a crane at night, I can't do night exposures. Let me just go back. You actually, in this picture, it is a perfect sundial. And you're going to see that in a lot of my work. As my work has evolved, you're seeing the rotation of time in really precise ways. So Jack and Rose Less, I met them during that Madoff story, and they had an incredible rent-controlled apartment on Central Park. And when I did the portrait of them, I saw this view, and I said, do you guys think I could come back if it snows? And they go, sure, Stephen, no problem. I said, well, I'm not like your normal house guest. I said, I come at like 5:30 in the morning, and I don't leave till like 9 at night. And they said, no problem. If you can get in, you're welcome to it. So 18 inches of snow, probably one of the great snowstorms we've ever had here in New York. And I was so fortunate to get this. Again, time, this is Park Avenue during spring. And if you look, the canyon is changing time. As you go down Park Avenue, time is changing. Gramercy Park. So again, you think about, the narrative, the idea of storytelling. And when you see my prints in person, and I encourage all of you to go down to Bryce Wilkes Gallery. My show is going to be up through January, and check out the work in person, because as much as I can share with you here, when you see my prints in person, you'll see what I mean, the level of detail. I'm really trying to give you an experience of being there, and that's one of the fun things. So this is one we did of Coney Island, and this is one that I literally didn't even stop to eat lunch. I think I ate my sandwich and kept shooting because I was so afraid of missing people like that guy. But this is what it's like when you walk up to my prints up close. You see this level of detail. There's a whole story, and I invite you in, really, because part of what I'm trying to create here is beyond a harmony between these two discordant worlds. It's really about telling a story. It's about what it's like, the experiences that we all share but never take the time to look at. This is my old neighborhood. So this one took 7 months. So Union Square is something, I lived in Union Square. We lived there for almost 16 years. And I had a lot of fun with this one because, again, we get into a cab, we start walking, and you're going from point A to B, and you feel all this energy, which is, by the way, there's a guy stepped in poop. They're having an argument. All these things are going on. You're going to see this lady broke up with her boyfriend, I think. There's a guy going through the garbage. You have one of the 1%ers in a box. You just can't believe. I mean, so people say to me, how do you pay attention for 15 hours? Well, look what's out there. how could you sleep during this? So I love that. I love the fact that I'm just fascinated by looking. Park Avenue. Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. And I don't have a loop view of this one, but trust me when I tell you, if you go and see it in the gallery, on the right-hand side, you look at that apartment building, you're going to see a whole family actually having Thanksgiving dinner in my picture. And in this one, time goes backward. The parade goes backwards. Day is on the left. Watch it. And because time changes, the parade is backwards. And that's the kind of fun I get to have, you know. I really feel like this is my primordial soup of photography. It's everything I love about the medium. And as you see in some of this newest work I'm going to show you, I did a series of the national parks. You can see how the work is even evolving further. Again, this is checkerboarding time, a Christmas tree, Rock Center. New Year's. Jerusalem. This is during an event called the Priestly Blessings. And this was a very, very special day for me to be there personally. I'd never been to Israel before, so to see this and capture it the way we did was really, really unique and special. So what people always look at, they see these pictures and you see this great crowd. How do you possibly change time like that? So what you're not seeing is I'm photographing all the in-between moments. So every time somebody begins to leave or separate, I get a picture. That's how I pay attention throughout the day and night. If I don't photograph a very specific way, these pictures cannot be executed in post. I have an incredible team behind me. Fantastic assistant who's here tonight, Chris Janich, and my wife, Betty, who's the producer, and of course my retoucher, Nina Schoenberg. This work is, when I tell you, it's months of work to get what you see here. But I think one of the things that's so rewarding is the way people react to this. The concept of putting a face on time is really, really extraordinary. Anybody see Blade Runner in this one? Yeah, Shanghai. This is the sister image, the West Coast version, Santa Monica Pier. And, you know, again, it's all about narrative. As you begin to look at this work, you can see there really are no details that we don't sort of look into and look at. And, you know, who could imagine that I would capture actually someone being arrested on the night side? Only in Los Angeles, right? Someone's eating cotton candy on the day and they're watching an arrest on the night. This was really one of the most exciting ones we've done. Again, I'm now folding history into the work. This was the second inauguration. The president actually approved me to do this picture 5 days before the actual inauguration. So what you're seeing is they gave me permission to be 50 feet in the air on a 50-foot scissor lift. This is 10 hours of photographing. They allowed me to be essentially have the exact same view that the Washington Monument. CNN was on my left, CBS News was on my right. I was the dead center view. I got the primo spot. And I'm the only guy who's up in the air. So it was an incredible experience. And, you know, again, getting a sunrise like this, one of the things is if you look at the TV monitors, time is actually changing through the TV monitors. And in the large print, you can actually see there's sharpshooters on top of the Capitol building. And when I made the picture, one of the things that happens when I do these pictures, so normally I told you I'm in these big, big cranes, like 150, 170. That's because they're so stable. Well, the government, they said, Stephen, you can't bring a 150-footer in here. 50 foot, that's it. So I'm full extension on a scissor lift. So if you've ever been on a scissor lift, if you shift your weight this way, guess what? The whole thing shifts this way. So my assistant and I, we had literally, he's sitting down in the exact same position, same body language, everything for 10 hours. I taped my feet into position. Every time I took a picture, I'm in the exact same perspective. Because if I'm off perspective, if I lean back or forward, the camera moves. So, and then at the end of the day, I get 6:10 p.m. I shoot my first night exposure. At 6:15, 35 mile an hour, steady gusts hit the, that's it, game over. I got one picture for night. So that's how lucky we have to be to get these things. So many things have to break. Chicago, Millennium Park. Again, this is just shows you the detail and the fun I had. So I wanted to make a picture. This is a historical picture because you'll notice left field is clean at this point. They have a jumbotron there now. You can't see this anymore. So I knew there's going to be history here. And watch what happens when you cross the flagpole. That's the best part, you know. The game's on. You know, I'm changing time. And different moments happen in the game based on time. This was the America's Cup race, the finals. I was allowed to photograph from Alcatraz, from the actual top of the lighthouse on Alcatraz. I think I'm the only photographer they've ever allowed to do that. And it was really a fantastic experience. I thought I'd be really comfortable up there, you know, because I'm on a stationary thing. But then I found out that it's 100 steps up and down to go to the bathroom. So suddenly wasn't so comfortable. But this is the Tournelle Bridge from my series in Paris. The Eiffel Tower. We shot this from, again, a 150-foot crane. They allowed me to boom over the Tournelle Bridge, over the Eiffel Tower. And we had 2 thunderstorms on this day, which is very scary when you're in a crane with lots of electrical equipment. It's not exactly what you want to do. But we were able to survive it. And, of course, the benefit of that is you get a rainbow sometimes. This is London. This is a view from the Savoy Hotel. Trafalgar Square. So this was one of the most insane ones that I've ever done because the amount of people in this picture. Trafalgar was extraordinary. We got special permission to build a scaffolding in front of the Portrait Gallery, National Portrait Gallery, right in front of Trafalgar. And one of the things that was fascinating was I found what they call the sweet spot, which is if you look at perspective, Trafalgar Square goes down. I went up the exact amount that Trafalgar goes down. So when you view this photograph, you're going to see visually, I can see completely into the whole scene. No one is really, blocking me because it is literally this perspective that is so exciting to capture. And there's a wonderful painter that I discovered. I showed this in London. People kept coming up to me going, "My God, it looks like a Lowry." And I was like, "Lowry? Who's Lowry?" I never knew the artist. And then I started looking him up, and he was this wonderful artist. I believe it was in the 20s. He was fascinated by places just like I'm depicting here. And he painted with almost an identical perspective, which is really, really fascinating. Again, this is Essex House, the view from Essex House. And again, just show you some of the details that, let's see. So again, even though the scale, you can see what's going on in this picture, there's a lot of little information. And that's what happens when you get into my prints. There's just all these stories going on. So this was a fun one. I was photographing Sacré-Cœur and had an amazing view from actually the guy was a 93-year-old detective who was also an opera singer. He allowed us to shoot from his balcony. And we spent about 15 hours doing this picture. And we discovered something. As I kept photographing, I kept noticing that people really weren't looking at Sacré-Cœur. They were much more interested in doing selfies. So what you're going to see is I watched what appeared to be almost 300 selfies going on, and it became Sacré-Cœur selfie. But it does reflect on where we are, as a species, that this has become so important that you can't experience it with your eyes in a way. The act of sharing has become more important than seeing it with your own eyes. So that brings me to my day tonight of the national parks. So I had this idea. I was going to do the national parks, the National Geographic. Loved the idea, especially after I showed them the first one that I did. This is Yosemite. And it was inspired by a painting by a guy named Albert Bierstadt, who was a wonderful Hudson River School painter. And what you're seeing is Bierstadt did this painting about 100 years ago. And you're going to see my photograph, and it's the opposite view of what Bierstadt painted. But what you're going to see is, which was extraordinary, is the light is so similar in my photograph. And that's because I believe that 100 years earlier, Bierstadt painted his scene within a week of, in terms of the arc of the sun, we were essentially in the same line. So this is what happened when I made this picture. I began to realize that, for the first time, I started crossing into an area where it started to embrace a little bit of some of the things that I feel social conscious-wise are important. One of them is you begin to realize how insignificant we are as a species. And that was something that I felt when I viewed this landscape, is that, again, the Earth is here. We are just like ants in the whole scheme of things. What you're seeing on the left side as you look at this picture, that's actually moonlight. And those lights, those are climbers' headlamps. They sleep on top of the face of El Capitan at night. Those are the stars. And this picture goes day to night. Night to day, back into night. So it's 26 hours of photographing. By the way, I'm on top of a tunnel on a 45-degree angle for a long time making this picture. So this is one we did recently, and this is in the Serenera. One of the most remarkable experiences, I would say, of my life as a photographer was we essentially camped out. We spent the night in the middle of the Serenera. This is not a reserve. This is in the middle of a national park. It took weeks of planning to get permission from the Tanzanian government, but they did. And they allowed us to go off-road behind a watering hole. And so what you're seeing is 26 hours of photographing. We are 18 feet in the air. We built, on top of a truck, we built a speed rail rig. And on top of that speed rail, we built a platform, and then around us was a crocodile blind. So we're essentially viewing through what was like a 20 by 24 window, my assistant Chris and I, for 26 hours. And we witnessed all of these animals coming in and out of our pictures. It was absolutely mind-boggling. But the best part of this photograph was, I mentioned how water, and I shoot rising seas in the documentary work. Again, this is a moment where I feel like something happened by sheer luck, really, an accident. We came there with the intent of capturing the migration. That was the idea, capture the migration. But in the middle of the migration, we realized there was a 5-week drought going on. So I knew that they had to come to this watering hole because there was no other water anywhere. And so we studied them for about 3 days and realized that, wow, there's a really good chance we're going to get a lot of wildlife in this picture. And we did. And it was an extraordinary experience. And one of the magical moments of the whole thing was we watched them for 26 hours literally share a single resource, water, a resource that they say, who knows how many years from now we'll be fighting wars over. But for 26 hours, these competitive species all shared and never even grunted at each other. And somehow we walked away and said, you know, the animals have kind of got it figured out. Like they can fight over, like, you know, the meat or the grass, but when it comes to water, everybody shares. And that was the lesson in this photograph. So this is going to be part of the series that's going to appear in the Geographic. The Cherry Blossom Festival. So this is peak cherry blossoms. Again, I'm in an 80-foot crane. We are there for about 16 or 18 hours photographing. These are all the moments as time changed. One of the exciting things about, and the things that I've discovered through this process is how color affects us, and the color of light changing throughout the day, how it changes the way you perceive the world. And this is the Grand Canyon. And what you're going to begin to see is how this work is evolving now, because I'm really excited about creating a perception of depth, and I'm using the power of light to really effectively, and the power of the color of light to create such a visual perspective in my work. You know, it's way beyond just telling a story. Now I'm interested in giving you a visual, or really, I say a visceral experience. I want to create almost like a window for you, like you're standing there with me. And so hopefully when you see my prints, you're going to feel that a little bit. And I think that's where the medium of photography is going. That's what's so exciting about being alive today and being a photographer, is that we can do things, you know, you could only dream about before. And this is Yellowstone. I'm going a little long, so are you guys all okay? Good, okay. So Yellowstone, what I did was Old Faithful became essentially a vertical clock, you know, the arms of a clock. And when you see this, and basically the walkway becomes the face of the clock. So time is almost on 2 axis points. And, you know, one of the things I do when I do these pictures, I've been sort of thinking a lot about Einstein's theory of relativity and how it's visualized, right? He loved to visualize a lot of his theories, more so than doing them by rote. And the theory of relativity was based on creating the fabric. What time was a fabric, and then you would drop a ball in it, and a bowling ball, and you'd see the fabric warp based on the weight of the ball. And I'm essentially, what I'm trying to explore, and I'm realizing it, is I look at time like that fabric, except I flatten it. And so as you move through this photograph, you saw the shadows actually rotate on the clock face. And you see the sun and the moon in the same picture. And this is the most recent one we've done. Nobody's really seen this yet. This is Venice. And I was inspired on this one by Canaletto. And I always wanted to shoot Venice because Venice is timeless, right? Venice still looks like a Canaletto painting. And I actually used Canaletto as my guide and my scout. And so because, you know, it hasn't changed. And so there was a famous painting he did in about 1749, I think, of this thing called the Regatta Storica, the historical regatta. And I decided that's when I want to do the picture. I want all of these boats from the 1500s, people in full dress. I want to go back in time. H.G. Wells, here I come. And so that's what this picture is about. An exciting thing happened in this photograph too, and that is, there are no clouds in this photograph. And so I was able to do a study of how the color blue changes as time changes, right? The color of light. And I hope you do get to see these in person, in the prints. So last thing I'm going to share with you is something that a lot of which nobody's seen it. Sorry. It's called Tapestries. And it started with an iPhone. And I hope if you don't follow me on Instagram, please follow me, because this is the kind of stuff I do on it. I'm experimenting all the time. And this is doing multiple images with an iPhone. And I got so excited when I was doing my day to night project, and I was just screwing around. And I discovered something. The layering and the feeling, it reminded me of Turner's paintings of Venice. It reminded me of many, many different artists. But what I loved most about it was it all happened within 8 seconds. I would shoot boom, 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 boom. And so it was a very spontaneous thing. I was grabbing something. It was like frenetic. It was like Jackson Pollock, like the idea of like the speed of it. Where day to night is this very long, thorough, deep process. This was a very spontaneous type of experience for me, and I loved it. And so it's something that I'm exploring now. So this is some of the work I'm doing from Venice that I'm going to share with you. I've never shown this stuff yet. And I call them tapestries because they're woven in a way. It's an interesting way, but it's taking time and I'm weaving it in a different way. And that's it. Thank you very much. I'd love to take some questions. I'm totally open to that if you like.
Almost? Yeah, there we go. Okay. So we're going to do a quick Q&A. We'll take about 10 minutes, and then we'll be on our way. One person who was sitting next to me asked, could you repeat the name of the gallery and the address?
Yeah, it's the Bryce Wilkes Gallery. It's 505 West 24th Street. It's on 10th Avenue and 24th Street. Bryce Wilkes.
Great. Right around the corner, practically.
Yeah. It's very close. 9 minutes from here walking.
Yes, sir.
So a process question on your night to day photos.
Which photos?
The night to day ones?
Day to night, yes.
Day to night,
Sure,
sorry.
no problem.
The construction of that, so you kind of, when you're in Photoshop, are you like putting the layers of all the photos you shot through the day into one Photoshop, or are you going through each one and going, these are the 14 pixels I want out of this one?
No, well, what I do is I create what's called a master plate. And so what we try to do is, based on time, I create a photograph that's essentially has no elements in it except the color of light changing, the overall photograph compositionally based on time. And then once we have that, then I begin to, based on the specific moments of time during the day, those moments get layered in seamlessly. So you have to start with a naked plate. But that's part of the process is how I build that and how we capture that. That's why, for every moment I get, I have to be thinking about, do I have the negative of that moment, the inverse, yeah.
How you doing, Stephen?
Hey, good.
It was funny because I'm watching your work, and about 4 photos in, I'm saying, I wonder, does this guy know Jay Maisel, right? And then you said he was your mentor.
Yes.
Right? So I saw Jay Maisel in in a seminar at PPE recently. I mean, stuff was mind blowing.
Yeah,
right?
fantastic
And so I hear you talk about how you feel the moment and
Sure.
things like that. So if you know Jay, you know when you ask him a question, it's very colorful sometimes when he answers you back.
Absolutely.
right?
Depends on his mood.
Yeah.
Did he have a cigar or no?
No, he didn't. And he was unapologetic, so I understand. Right. So my question is that I asked him too, what is it in your background or either your right now that causes you to see how you see?
Well, I think it's, I think seeing I mean, I think I see the picture. You know, people always ask me, do you pick up the camera to see the picture? No, no, no. I see the picture in here. And the camera is just something that I use. That's the tool that I express my vision with. It didn't always happen that way. That's when you really live and breathe photography for years, decades, that you begin to evolve into that, where the mind and the eye and the idea of what technical is become obsolete. You know, you're not thinking about technical things anymore. I don't think about technical things. I'm thinking about what I want visually, and everything else goes off of that. That takes years of practice, and you know, it comes, but you have to be very dedicated, and it's about mastery of craft. And I always tell people, you could be the greatest digital photographer in the world. If you haven't really mastered analog, you're not going to be as good as you think you are in digital. I don't care, you know, it's just the way it is. Analog, it teaches you a core foundation. And it's because of that that I feel that my brain is wired differently. Like, I couldn't have done day to night unless I did ELLIS Island, you know. But the other element of your question, I think it's a synthesis of all your life experiences. I think it's about going to museums. It's about reading. It's about seeing motion pictures. You heard that tonight in my talk, is that all these things come through me in different ways. You never know where the intersection is. But the thing is, you got to put yourself out there. My son is a wonderful artist and a musician. We always talk about this. We've got to feed your soul. If you don't feed your soul, then, you know, you're empty, you see. And so you can do all kinds of great work, but at a point, if you don't go out and like reconnect and reach out and, like I said, get that art, love, let it immerse you, let it, you know, fill you in a way, then, you know, you run dry. You run dry. Sure.
Thank you. Hi. In the, I'm sorry, over here.
Sure.
In the picture from Paris, I saw the Eiffel Tower. That was a night. The picture was at night.
Yes.
You had to get permission to do that because I've heard
Yeah.
that you can't shoot it at night because certain licensing.
I did. You're absolutely right. That's a very good point. That is the artist's lights in my photograph, and I got special permission from the artist because I am an artist. If I was doing this for a commercial project, I would have paid, I think it's something like $50,000 or something like that. So to answer your question, yeah, because I'm doing it as a fine artist, the artist was very gracious and allowed me to use it and incorporated him. He gave me permission, but we asked his permission. Yeah, we got it.
Thank you very much from beginning to end.
Thank
It was
you.
Beautiful, really.
Thank you.
The early work, the Katrina work, I mean, all of it was very moving.
Thank you.
The question I have is, your photographs often have such a found quality to it, where you stumble upon it. But then, in like the fisherman in the boat in Alabama, or the sock factory in China, they seem very, very staged, where you built the picture.
Mm-hmm.
Is the transition, you know, from one mentality to the next hard to do on a job?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very, very good question. I think, you know, there's a constructive narrative sometimes, and then sometimes there's the found narrative, right? I like to say I have learned over the years to make pictures, and then I take pictures, right? And that what you're describing is very much that. So you work, you know, I've been fortunate enough to, you know, I worked over the years and continue to do commercial photography too. And one of the reasons I do that is it leads me to things, you know. Sometimes I get exposed to things that I'd never see otherwise. But when you have to have that ability, you know, on a given day, I have to deliver the goods. You know, they expect, oh, I want a Stephen Wilkes picture today, you know, not tomorrow. They don't want to wait a week. They want it today. So you have to develop a certain strategy and ability. And what I say to people, young photographers all the time, I said, look, you know, I started as a street photographer, but I'm a student of looking, right? So I study everything. And if I recreate something, or it's because of that inherent quality, that I have that, I'm a looker. I'm constantly hunting, I'm constantly, I never stop looking, and I never stop taking pictures. I just can't. I mean, the friends of mine say to me, it's like, I'll be in the middle of a conversation with you and you just see something. It's like, I just act like I'm not even talking to them because I get so overwhelmed by having to take the picture. So if you're a photographer, if it's part of your psyche and in your core, then that's what it's about. And the idea that whether it's constructed or it's just like I said, I see it, it's in my head. Now I want to tell the story. In China, I was feeling something. I wanted this idea of this mechanized, visually, perfection and almost the almost robotic quality of it all, and that was part of my narrative, and that's why it's so formalist, that picture, because I use that as a way to make a statement in a way. So everything is for a reason. The narrative and the way I choose to do things is all based on what is the story I'm going to tell.
That was a fantastic range of photographs, from still lifes to portraits to landscapes. So I'm just wondering, what are sort of your inspirations in terms of photographers? And you named Turner as an artist that sort of inspired you. And are there any photographers that are relatively less well known that people who are learning should look into?
I mean, there are a lot of great photographers, but I'll be frank with you. I mean, I had more connection with the older school guys. The Penns, the Avedons, Margaret Burke White, the people, Walker Evans, Robert Frank was a huge influence on my work early on. When I did California One, I rode around with the Americans. I mean, literally, I carried it with me. I would go to sleep at night looking at it. It was so inspirational. And of course, Jay Maisel was a huge one. Pete Turner, Ernst Haas in color. I found that, there are a lot of. I mean, Richard Misrock is a fantastic photographer. There's, Gursky is a wonderful photographer. There are a lot of great artists out there, but I really do find that I get more of my inspiration personally from painting. I've learned more about seeing from painting than almost anything else.
Thank you for your work on the New Orleans series, Katrina. I was actually living in New Orleans when the storm hit, and it was important that was documented well, and thank you.
Thank you.
Just what would you give a piece of advice to an aspiring photographer or artist? I know it's a lot to roll up into one sort of phrase or word or whatever, but what would you say to an aspiring photographer?
I'd say everything is about passion, everything. So if you want to do this, you got to be obsessed. You got to want it so bad that you can't think about anything else. And you know what? There's always room for somebody new. But here's the thing. Unless you eat, sleep, and breathe it. That's what Jay told me when I was a kid. Hey, man, you got to eat, sleep, and breathe it. But the fact is, I was. And I do. And I've never stopped doing that. And I think my wife will tell you, she knows if I don't get excited when I see something and start wanting to oh, then it's the beginning of the end. Then I know there's something I have to change what I'm doing. But I've always kept a joy-like quality, childlike quality about what it is, this thing, this incredible gift that came into my life, being photography. And if you can get that from something within that, if that can be that's your motor, and then feed it. Take time to do your own work. Everybody's driven to, I got to make money, I got to be successful. But what you got to realize is, one of my paths was, I realized early on that, if I did my own work, strange things happened. They didn't want to hire me for the thing I didn't want to shoot. They started hiring me for the thing I was doing on my own. Like, my passion became the driver for my commercial work in a way. So because people like, that Ellis Island, or day to night, that became the thing. So do your own work. And if you're not motivated to do your own work, you're going to have a tough time, because that's really what it's about. It's about feeding your soul, because that's where I start, that's where I live, and that's where I die. It's about my soul,
Okay, this is going to be our last question for the night.
It's hard enough for a photographer to get into the moment, to get rid of the mental noise that they carry around with them all day long, to be affected by color, to be affected by light, to be affected by form. How do you keep your concentration for 15 hours with your feet taped to the ground?
Is that what is that movie with Bradley Cooper? You know, he takes that pill and honestly, what I do is I'm doing a puzzle. You know, it's like Sudoku on acid, but it's a puzzle. It is. I am, viewing the world. I'm hunting. I'm the ultimate. I always say when we're 50 feet in the air, you see the world differently, right? I mean, you see the energy, and it's almost like a form of emergent behavior. You see the flow, what people describe as New York, the energy of New York. Well, we watch that, we study it. And, there's so many things going on between gesture, light changing, shadows rotating, all these things that go on. I know where you're going. You're going, still, Stephen, you're standing there for 15 hours. Come on. Yeah, but you know what? I do it, and it's always amazing to me because Chris and I always look at each other and we'll go, yeah, it's 4 o'clock. We can kind of wait now for the rotation, or it's 5. When it hits a certain point where we know we can just sort of as the sun sets and we're waiting for the moonlight, we're like, okay, we can relax now for 2 hours. Wait for the moon to come up. It's funny, but you'd be amazed. You spend an entire day in a place, and it seems like forever, but I don't know. I have a whole different appreciation of time doing these pictures. I've never spoken to Chris about it, but I bet he does too. There's something about it. There's something about the depth and the length of a study. And I think, what you begin to realize is that you're getting something from it. Do you know what I mean? It's not just a chore. It's not a chore. It's like a gift in a way.
All right, let's give a thanks for Lexar once again for bringing incredible Stephen Wilkes here to SVA Theater.
Whether you're a hobbyist or a professional, B&H has the answers to your questions. Experience a world of technology at our New York City Superstore. Connect with us online or give us a call. Our staff of experts is happy to help.